As the attention turns now to Vice President Kamala Harris, Mary, thank you. I want to move over to our Zohreen Shah. She was one of the campaign reporters that followed Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign when she was running for president, has since been following her very closely. Zohreen, as the American people are now focused in on Vice President Kamala Harris, with President Biden giving this firm endorsement to his own vice president, talk a little bit about her history, what she's been focused on, and her background.
Yeah, Rachel, I want to talk about actually the historic nature of this moment, the potential historic nature, I should say. I mean, you heard John Carl say it's not a done deal. Rick Klein said technically she's not the nominee, but it appears to be heading in that direction. She would be the first black female nominee, the first Indian American ever if she were to become the nominee. And I want to point out her book, right? I'm sure you have read her book. Page 1 starts 8 years ago with Hillary Clinton, the day that she was up against Donald Trump and the day she lost. I mean, we are going back potentially to that moment where she is taking that very spot potentially. And we know that that moment is actually what inspired her to run for president years later. You and I both covered that 2019 campaign. And the last 2 days, I've been speaking a lot to about 20 of her loyalists from that campaign, those donors, those people who committed their money, their energy, their emotional energy to that moment. They also saw her lose in that moment. But every one of the people who I spoke to the last few days feel like they would support her, of course, if she were to be the nominee. In fact, one person told me there would be a deluge of money coming in, 8 to 9 figures, he suspects. He says there's a lot of pent-up frustration, anger, and confusion, but he believes she could energize this particular moment. Another person said he's been to 10 conventions in his life. He was not planning on going to this one, but he says if Kamala Harris is the nominee, he would drop everything. He says it is all hands on deck. You are starting over. You have 4 months to get elected. So a lot of excitement from those former donors and also from her former staff. I've been speaking to them also the last few days. Look, that campaign ended in a very, very almost emotional way for them. It ended abruptly 2 months before Iowa even started. A lot of them feel like they can pick up where that campaign potentially left off and see the history that they might have wanted to see at that moment.
Yeah, undoubtedly a historic moment. Zohreen, thank you. I want to go right now to our Martha Raddatz. Martha, as we're talking more about Vice President Kamala Harris and really taking a closer look at her and what she's been in charge of in this administration, we know that she's been the leading voice on abortion rights as well as handling the migrant crisis at the border. How has the administration at the White House internally and privately felt about her handling on some of these key issues?
Well, I think they were, in the beginning, wanted her out there a bit more, and especially down on the border. But I'll tell you, Rachel, in the last week, what I have been told by a senior administration official is that all of this pressure on Biden and post-debate, that they thought Kamala Harris was pitch perfect. They thought she was a supporter President Biden, never wavered from that, and yet went out there and gave the message of the Democratic Party, supported him, and yet was ready to go in if needed. I'm also, Rachel, kind of looking back on this morning and our show on This Week, and I'm looking at Congressman Ro Khanna, who I asked right after Senator Joe Manchin said, it was with a heavy heart, but he wanted to see the president step aside. Ro Khanna said he still stood by the president's decision to stay in. I talked to him about the polling, saying 61% of the voters in our national poll thought he should step aside. And he said, I've seen that polling. Here's the challenge. That polling was almost the same a year and a half ago. There's no question that voters don't like the fact that Joe Biden is 81, but he said, what I have not seen is a poll showing that another candidate, other than perhaps Michelle Obama, would clearly be the choice of the Democratic electorate. I also played for him from our George Stephanopoulos' interview post-debate, the first interview with President Biden post-debate, and he said, if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi come down and say, we're worried that if you stay in the race, we're going to lose the House and the Senate, How will you respond? And basically the president said they're not going to do that. But the congressman from California and a huge supporter of President Biden went on to say, this is the president's decision. You know, I've read all these journalists saying Biden world is saying this or he's reconsidering. There are 3 or 4 people who actually have this decision: the president, his wife, a couple of close friends, and it's his decision about what he wants to do. And I trust him. I trust his patriotism to make the right decision. So as I reread these transcripts, Rachel, I'm kind of reading between the lines of what he was thinking this morning. Surely he did not know, was not aware of the decision that would be made today because, as you know, so many people were taken by surprise.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So many of us are going back and reading things that President Biden said. I remember in that interview with our George Stephanopoulos, he also said that he wouldn't step aside unless the Lord God Almighty came down and told him to do it. So you've got to think, Martha, that some of this polling, this pressure, 40 Democrats urging him to step aside had something to do with him making this decision.
Exactly. And again, I just repeat here that the senior administration official said to me that the last couple of days had truly taken a toll on him, not only on his health and his decision making, but they believe he does not, even now, think he has been intellectually diminished, but his health and his energy, he could tell that the campaign would take even more of that out of him and that it was not a campaign he could run.